name is Karine. I had a breast reduction when I was about 20, and during my pregnancy, that was sort of one of my concern. Didn't know, but I was very funny about it. I just kind of felt like if I kept thinking it was going to be fine, it was going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing colostrum coming out while I was pregnant, and I thought that was a really, really good sign. And so I was all basically much more concerned about giving birth and breastfeeding. So when I gave birth to my son, it ended up being an emergency C-section at the hospital, which was not at all what I had planned, and it was very traumatic and difficult. And it was one of like those moments where they finally put him at the breast. I was, you know, totally out of it, exhausted from 2 days of trying to give birth to him and throwing up the whole time, and I barely remember them putting him on the breast. I just remember falling asleep. And after that, we were in the hospital for, I think it was 2 or 3 days, or maybe more. It just seems like one big. And we kept trying, and each nurse would come in, and she'd be like trying to figure it out and do things, and I mean, it was very hard. He wouldn't really lash, but sometimes people would say, oh, he's lashing on. Oh, he's not. Oh, he's falling asleep. And he ended up losing 10% of his mass, of his body weight. And it was just awful. We left, and I thought, okay, maybe I should get a lactation consultant. And our midwife was like, well, come back and I'll weigh him. And I didn't know at the time that the scales are not consistent. So she thought he had gained weight, but he hadn't. And when we went 2 days later to the hospital to get him weighted, the physician just lost it on me. He was like, this child's totally dehydrated. He needs to be readmitted. What have you done? How come you didn't give him formula? And it was just, it made me feel horrible about it. And he asked the nurse to put pumps on to see how much milk I had. And I was extremely stressed because, you know, this guy has just basically told me that my baby was going to be in an incubator and they were going to have to give him IV, and I was going to have to be away from him. And you know, it just made me feel like the most horrible mother in the world. And then I end up with those 2 things in front of me pumping, and of course I ended up with like, you know, 1/3 of an ounce basically, which is nothing. And then he came back and he said, you don't have any milk, so formula from now on. One of the nurses just felt, I guess, really bad for me because I was such a mess at that point, and it was like, you know, the peak of postpartum blues. So I was just the anxiety and the hormones, and I was just really not in a good place. And she basically said, you know, we have a lactation consultant on staff. Would you like to meet with her? And I said, oh yeah, I didn't even know what a lactation consultant really was. And I was like, yes. And part of me was thinking, how come they didn't tell me that when I was in the hospital and I had all these problems, and they kept giving me formula to supplement him. And I finally met with her the following day, and she basically looked at me breastfeeding and all this stuff, and she said, it's really strange. He can't seem to lash very well. She said, it looks like he's got like a gag reflex, and so he's pushing your nipple away all the time. And she said, well, we'll keep working at it. And she made me do exercise like pulling his tongue down with my finger before putting it on. But the one thing that made a huge difference is that she said to me, if you have milk, it's because the nerve wasn't severed, wasn't cut. And she said, so you're fine. If by 5 day you have your milk coming in slowly and you're still having letdowns, it's just a question of maybe some of the glands were taken out, so you might not have as much milk, but you can breastfeed, right? And finally, the doctor said, if you want to get out of here, and it was Mother's Day, he said, if you want to get out of here for Mother's Day, you cut all of this. You just give him the bottle. and he has to gain that much weight. So I did, just so I could get out. And it's the weirdest thing to ever say to someone. I bottle fed my child to save my breastfeeding relationship, but I did, because that was the only way I was going to get out of there. Well, basically what happened is that there wasn't a gag reflex. And I basically left the hospital, and one of my aunts is a public health nurse in a different city. So I had an uncle come and get me with my baby and drive 2.5 hours back to her. And she was like, okay, we're gonna figure this out. And she had someone follow me, and she came and made sure that the position was right. And there was her and another nurse that were working with me. And we basically said, when the following weekend, she said, we're gonna cut all the supplement, we're gonna cut everything, all the pump, everything, and we're just gonna breastfeed as much as you can by making sure it's fine. And at the end of the weekend, he had gained weight. So I continued on that path, but it was a very uneven path where some days he would breastfeed really, really well, and some days he wouldn't. So my weeks would be like this. And she called me back a couple weeks later. She said, I was talking with the other nurse, and she felt like your tongue tie was very, very short, his tongue tie. And I said, well, that's very interesting, because in the family, I had mine cut. My cousin had hers cut, and her daughters had hers cut. It was all too short, and it's a genetic thing. And of course, never thought about it. Nobody ever said to me that might be an issue with breastfeeding. So my aunt said, find someone in Montreal to cut it. And at the time, I ended up calling at the hospital, not where I gave birth, but a different one, and asked if they knew of anybody that did that, and they transferred me or gave me the name of a specific doctor. And I got in touch with her, and she was the doctor that was part of the brand new Jewish hospital breastfeeding clinic in Montreal, which is the second breastfeeding clinic in Canada. And when I went to see her, she was with Carol Dobridge, who was also a Lait League leader in her Australia. I think she's Australian and New Zealand. And she's also a lactation consultant, and so she was working with Dr. Perlman. And when I sat down with them, they said, oh my God, yes, it's way too short. She went click, put him on the breast, and I started crying because it was night and day. And basically he's 5 and I'm still breastfeeding him.